You know, when you look at a maritime map from the 1500s, it's this incredibly jarring mix of hard-won precision and, well, absolute fantasy.
Oh, like the ones with the giant sea monsters drawn on the edges.
Yeah, exactly. You'll have this perfectly charted coastline, right? Every
Yeah.
little inlet and peninsula meticulously documented.
Because some sailor actually took a physical boat out there, risked their life, and rowed it.
Right. And then right next to that beautiful, rigorous precision, there's just a massive blank space covering half the ocean.
Hmm.
And it's just filled with a drawing of a kraken and the words, here be dragons.
It is the literal boundary line between hard-earned experience and the absolute unknown.
Yeah,
Those early cartographers, they completely understood the physics of sailing, like how wind worked, how buoyancy worked, but the actual terrain they were sailing into was still a complete mystery.
and I feel like anyone trying to build a company right now or invest in one, or frankly, anyone just trying to figure out how their own career survives in this modern economy has been navigating using a map that was drawn like a decade ago.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
It's got some great coastlines charted out from the 2010s, but suddenly the terrain itself is violently shifted underneath us. So for you listening, our mission for this deep dive is to unroll a highly detailed, updated map.
A much-needed one. Right.
We are dissecting this fascinating, incredibly dense field manual from today, April 26th, 2026. It's drawn from the writings of tech blogger Paramendra Kumar Phagat.
And what makes this particular manual so compelling, is its sheer ambition. The author essentially takes the foundational, almost religious texts of Silicon Valley.
The sacred texts.
Right, the core startup philosophies of three absolute titans, Mark Andreessen, Paul Graham, and Naval Ravikant. And he subjects them to a brutal stress test against the reality of the year 2026.
Right, because the reality of today is that we are living in a moment where the rise of agentic AI, automated coding, and these massive algorithmic choke points, they've completely mutated the rules of venture capital.
The rules have entirely changed.
We've moved far beyond the era of the billion-dollar unicorn. According to our sources, the ecosystem has shifted entirely. We are now entering the era of the Solara.
The Solara, yes. A company's not valued at $1 billion, but reaching trillion-dollar scale by operating entirely differently.
Which represents just a profound paradigm shift in how value is actually created.
And if you are listening to this right now, whether you are in your garage building a startup, whether you manage a venture fund, or if you're just trying to navigate a professional world where AI is quite literally eating software, understanding this shift is the ultimate shortcut.
Because you have to know what game you're playing.
Exactly. Specifically, the manual argues that we need to deconstruct the concept of product market fit, or PMF. PMF has always been the dividing line between what succeeds and what fails, right? But the actual mechanism of fit has been fundamentally rewired.
It is mind-blowing to consider the shift in bottlenecks. I mean, if you look back to, say, 2014, the bottleneck for innovation was pure engineering.
Oh yeah, writing scalable code was incredibly hard.
It was expensive, it was slow. You needed a team of 20 engineers just to build a reliable basic app. But today, the bottleneck has completely migrated. The bottleneck is now human attention.
Because building the software is practically free now.
Right. Getting a single human being to actually care about it is the monumental challenge.
That tension right there is the core engine of this entire source text. The technological tools have accelerated far beyond what anyone predicted even a decade ago.
But the people haven't changed.
Exactly. The laws of human desire, the gravitational pull of a market, and the psychology of a buyer, those mechanisms remain stubbornly, anciently unchanged.
Okay, well, let's unpack this from the absolute ground floor. Before we can even talk about how to build a product that people actually want to use, we have to understand the invisible environment that startups are operating within.
The macro view.
Yeah. Our sources start with the raw physics of venture capital, specifically updating Mark Andreessen's famous 12 lessons for the current decade.
Andreessen's worldview operates as the gravitational law of the entire tech ecosystem. And the first, most brutal reality he lays out is that venture capital operates on a power law.
Which is really counterintuitive for most people.
It is perhaps the hardest thing for anyone outside of the startup ecosystem to truly internalize. We are so conditioned by standard distributions in life. Most things cluster around an average, a bell curve.
Like height or grades in a classroom?
Right. But venture capital doesn't look like that at all. Our sources describe it more like an earthquake.
An earthquake. I love that analogy.
The math backs that up entirely. A power law distribution means that a microscopic fraction of outcomes doesn't just do well, it completely dominates and consumes the entire ecosystem.
So it's not just a slightly steeper curve.
No, the text outlines the sheer brutality of the funnel. Out of roughly 4,000 startups seeking funding in a given period, a top-tier VC firm might actually write a check to about 20 of them.
20 out of 4,000.
And out of the entire global ecosystem, maybe 200 are considered truly fundable by the elite firms in any given year.
Wow.
But here is the kicker, the return profile. About 15 companies generate 95% of all the economic returns for the entire venture capital industry.
Wait, let me just repeat that for you listening, because you really have to let that sink in. 15 companies out of thousands generating 95% of the wealth.
It's staggering.
That is not a curve. That is a vertical cliff face.
And it dictates every single behavior, every term sheet, and every psychological quirk in the industry. It means a venture capitalist mathematically cannot invest in a company that will just do pretty well.
Because pretty well actually loses the money in the long run.
Exactly. If a VC invests $10 million into your company and you return $30 million, a 3x return, which sounds amazing in traditional finance.
In real estate, you'd be a genius.
Right. But in VC, that is essentially a failure in the math of the fund. Because those 15 massive earthquake-level winners have to generate enough capital to pay for the hundreds and hundreds of companies that go to absolute zero.
So if you're a founder, right, and you're sitting across the table from a VC pitching your deck, they aren't looking at your financial projections wondering if you can build a nice, profitable, $20 million a year SaaS business.
Not at all.
They are staring at you, wondering if you have the capacity to become one of those 15 global earthquakes.
Which brings us to the operational reality of how VCs actually hunt for those earthquakes. Andreessen developed a 2x2 matrix for evaluating ideas that the source text updates for today.
Okay, let's break down this matrix.
So you have two axes to consider: consensus versus non-consensus on one axis, and success versus failure on the other.
So consensus just means everybody agrees it's a brilliant idea right out of the gate. And non-consensus means people look at you like you have two heads.
Correct. Now, obviously, if you invest in the failure column, you lose your money. It doesn't matter if everyone thought it was a good idea or a bad idea. Zero is zero.
Yeah. Failure is failure.
But the danger zone, the trap that destroys most funds and founders, is the successful and consensus quadrant.
Which sounds weird. Why is a successful, agreed-upon idea a trap?
Because if it's a great idea and every single person recognizes it's a great idea, the market dynamics immediately turn against you. It triggers a war of attrition.
Oh, because everyone swarms it.
Think about the mechanism there. If a market is obviously lucrative, say building a basic AI scheduling assistant back in 2024, everyone rushes in. Capital floods the zone. Valuations get driven through the roof before anyone has even built anything.
The hype cycle just takes over.
And the cost to acquire a customer skyrockets because you're bidding against 50 identical competitors for the exact same ad space. The returns compress until all the profit is squeezed out.
So the only quadrant that actually makes that brutal power law math work is successful and non-consensus. You have to be right, and the rest of the world has to be aggressively wrong at the exact time you make the bet.
And Andreessen translates non-consensus into a much more honest, visceral word in our sources. He just calls it crazy.
Crazy. Which sets up this incredible psychological dynamic.
Yeah.
The text notes that the future always arrives dressed like a clown.
I love that phrase.
It's so good. When human beings evaluate a breakthrough technology, we naturally use the mental models and the tools of the past to judge it.
We can't help it. Look at the historical examples the text highlights. When the iPhone launched, the consensus tech world mocked it relentlessly.
Oh, Steve Ballmer famously laughing at it.
Exactly, because it lacked a physical keyboard, which was the defining feature of a serious business phone like a BlackBerry.
Right.
Or Airbnb. The concept of letting strangers sleep on a blow-up air mattress in your living room was considered absurd, a massive safety liability, completely unscalable.
It sounded like a terrible idea.
Or Bitcoin, which was treated as a bizarre cryptographic toy for a tiny subculture.
The breakthrough ideas look like toys or terrible ideas initially. Because, I mean, if they looked like brilliant, obvious businesses with clear revenue models, the massive incumbent corporations would already be running them.
But the source material explicitly warns against founders misunderstanding this dynamic. This is a very common trap. Founders often mistake non-consensus for, "I refuse to explain myself," or My product is just confusing.
Right.
Being confusing is not the same thing as being non-consensus.
Yeah, if I can jump in with an analogy for you listening. If venture capital is essentially a game of high-stakes poker, not a game of chess,
That's a good distinction.
meaning you're making probabilistic bets with hidden information. You aren't just moving pieces on a perfectly visible board where everyone sees everything. So you might look down at your cards and think, oh, I have an ugly hand, therefore I am a misunderstood genius.
Right, which is just arrogance.
Exactly. But that's not it. Non-consensus means you have a seemingly incredibly ugly hand of cards that just happens to mathematically counter the exact hand the dealer is holding based on information only you have.
That is a highly accurate framing. You possess a specific hidden insight about why a timing collision is about to happen in the wider world.
A timing collision. Let's dig into the mechanics of that because this feels incredibly relevant to where we are today in 2026. The text says breakthroughs don't just happen because a founder is smart. They happen when compute power, cultural readiness, development tools, and cost reductions all suddenly violently align.
The author describes this as the phase transition theory of innovation,
Phase transition.
like in chemistry.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
In physics, water stays water as the temperature drops. It just gets colder and colder, but its state doesn't fundamentally change until it hits exactly 32 degrees Fahrenheit.
And then it freezes. Seemingly all at once. The entire body of water turns to ice. Technological ecosystems operate on the exact same mechanism. Consider the explosion of AI agents that we've seen dominate 2026. People have been talking about AI agents for over a decade.
Oh, forever. Every sci-fi movie and early tech demo promised us autonomous digital butlers that would just, run our lives. But they were always terrible. They were just party tricks.
They were party tricks because the temperature hadn't dropped to 32 degrees yet. It was just talk until a very specific set of underlying ingredients collided.
So what were those ingredients?
Well, first, large language models had to reach a certain threshold of logical reasoning. But reasoning isn't enough. API infrastructure had to become fully standardized across the web so these models could actually click buttons on the internet.
Right, they needed hands.
Exactly. And crucially, vector databases had to become cheap and highly accessible.
Because the vector database is what gives the AI long-term memory. Without memory, an agent can't execute a multi-day task. It just forgets what it's doing.
Precisely. You add the plummeting cost of inference, the actual compute power required to run the model, and suddenly the phase transition triggers. When those specific costs dropped and the culture was finally exhausted by managing their own digital workflows, the market ignited.
And this brings us to the biggest macro shift of all in the source material. Andreessen's original world-shaping thesis from 2011 was, quote, software is eating the world.
A legendary essay.
Meaning every legacy industry from retail to logistics to media was going to be replaced or completely dominated by software companies. But the 2026 update in our manual is stark. It says, AI is eating software.
Which represents a fundamental rewiring in the ontology of computing. For decades, software was essentially a tool. A human being opened a spreadsheet, a human being typed into a CRM, a human being clicked send on an email marketing platform.
The human was the driver.
Yes, software merely facilitated human labor. But in 2026, AI is turning software into a worker itself. Interfaces have become entirely conversational. Applications have mutated into autonomous agents.
It's wild to think about.
The software isn't just facilitating your workflow anymore, it is actively executing the workflow while you sleep.
But wait, let's think about the downstream effects of that. If AI can write the code, spin up the database, and execute the workflow, doesn't that make it exponentially easier for anyone, anywhere, to build a startup?
In theory, yes.
Shouldn't that abundance of creation flatten that brutal power law curve we were just talking about? I mean, if everyone can build, shouldn't wealth distribute more evenly?
You would naturally assume that. It seems logical. But the author's analysis of the 2026 landscape points in the exact opposite direction. The reality is that AI is actually steepening the power curve.
Making it worse?
Making the cliff face more vertical. Yes, creation is infinitely cheaper. You have far more startups existing today because a solo founder with an AI coding assistant can spin up an application in a single weekend that would have taken a 20-person engineering team an entire year to build back in 2015.
Right.
But, and this is the critical divergence, global monopoly scale winners are even rarer.
Because if anyone can build the product itself instantly loses its value as a defensive moat.
It is basic supply and demand. If the barrier to entry drops to zero, the arena floods with combatants, you have millions of people launching apps, the noise level becomes completely deafening.
Yeah, how do you even get noticed?
So the economic rewards no longer flow to the person who built the software.
Mm.
The rewards flow exclusively to the platform that aggregates the human attention or the monopoly that controls the underlying compute infrastructure.
The winner-take-most dynamic intensifies.
Exactly. Because escaping the noise requires a scale of distribution that very few can ever achieve.
Which has to exact a massive psychological toll on the founders trying to survive in that flooded arena.
Right.
I mean, Andreessen says a startup is essentially a psychological endurance contest. You're not executing a business plan. You are enduring daily misery.
It is a grind.
He defines courage for a founder not as some heroic cinematic charge into battle, but as pure stamina. Just waking up and not giving up when every single data point tells you to give up.
Yeah.
And if you want to understand the market, you also have to understand the psychology of the venture capitalist on the other side of the table.
Okay, let's talk about them.
The text points out that a venture capitalist's overriding fear isn't losing money. VCs lose money every single day. Their core psychological driver is FOMO, fear of missing out.
FOMO.
The ghost that haunts a VC at night isn't the $2 million they invested in a startup that went bankrupt. The ghost is the scruffy founder they laughed out of their office 5 years ago who just took their company public at a $50 billion valuation.
Right. They fear being historically irrelevant. They fear missing the Google or the Facebook.
Precisely.
But there's a dynamic here I really want us to explore because the landscape has changed. One of the classic historical advantages of VC was the concept of locked-up capital. Andreessen famously argued that because venture funds are legally locked for 10 years, investors physically cannot panic sell when the macro market dips.
They are forced to be patient.
Exactly. That forced patience allows founders to build long-term, ambitious things. But how on earth does that survive in 2026? We have highly liquid secondary markets. We have crypto token liquidity. Founders are selling shares early. The entire ecosystem is so fast, liquid, and twitchy.
That is a profound tension in the current market. The psychological lockup period has absolutely shortened. The pressure for a founder to show algorithmic traction and flip secondary shares to eager buyers is immense today.
It's all about the quick flip for some.
However, the foundational advantage of venture capital, the ability to fund deep tech, the hardware, the planetary scale problems that genuinely take a decade of R&D to mature, that still fundamentally relies on that patient capital structure.
So it's splitting into two different games.
What we're seeing in 2026 is a bifurcation. The fast, liquid money chases the quick AI wrappers and the consumer apps. The slow, patient money chases quantum computing, advanced robotics, and energy abundance.
Okay, so we've mapped out this brutal mathematical macro environment. If you're building something, you're operating in an earthquake zone, fighting a steepening power law, trying to perfectly time a phase transition, and relying on pure stamina while navigating a flooded market.
It's quite the gauntlet.
This perfectly sets the stage. If the market is this violent, unpredictable ocean, how do you actually catch a wave? How do you ensure you aren't just swept away?
That is the ultimate question.
And that is where the source material brings in Andreessen's most famous, ruthless law of survival. Let's look at his 2007 product market fit doctrine.
In 2007, Andreessen wrote a blog post that effectively became the holy text of Silicon Valley. In it, he broke a startup down into 3 fundamental variables: the team, the product, and the market.
And he didn't just list them as equal pillars, right? He ranked them. He established a hierarchy that, honestly, still makes incredibly smart, capable people very uncomfortable today.
Oh, absolutely. He argued that market is the absolute, unquestionable dominant force. He cites a concept he calls Rachleff's Law, named after Andy Rachleff of Benchmark Capital.
What's the law?
The law is brutally deterministic. When a great team meets a lousy market, the market wins. When a lousy team meets a great market, the market wins.
Let's really think about why that is so hard to swallow. If you are a founder, your ego naturally recoils at that.
You want to believe you matter.
You desperately want to believe that your grit, your Stanford degree, your incredible late-night coding sessions will guarantee your success. But Andreessen is essentially saying, no, you cannot hustle your way into demand.
You really can't.
If nobody fundamentally wants or needs the thing you are building, your killer team is just going to break its back digging for gold in a mountain that has absolutely no gold in it.
It strips away the illusion of control. Think about the mechanics of a bad market. It doesn't matter if your UI is beautiful. In a bad market, the sales cycles stretch from 3 months to 18 months. Customers churn because the product is a nice-to-have, not a necessity.
Yeah, they just stop logging in.
Your incredible team gets demoralized and leaves. The market crushes you. And that reality leads directly to his canonical definition of product market fit, or PMF.
Which is?
Being in a good market with a product that can satisfy that market.
It sounds almost insultingly simple.
It does.
There's no MBA jargon there, just are people violently trying to buy the thing you made?
Yeah.
But what I find so fascinating about the source material is how it describes PMF. It doesn't describe it as a metric on a dashboard. It describes it as a visceral, physical sensation.
The pull phenomenon. Andreessen draws a hard, bright line between the two distinct lives of a startup. Before product market fit, which he calls BPMF, and after product market fit, APMF.
What does BPMF feel like?
During BPMF, the daily reality is agony. He says it feels like dragging a dead animal through the sand.
Wow, what an incredibly evocative image, dragging a dead animal through the sand.
It perfectly captures the friction. Think about what that actually looks like operationally. You are constantly pushing the product onto people. You are sending thousands of cold emails and getting pure silence.
Just crickets.
You are begging journalists for a crumb of press. You are bribing users with discounts just to log in.
Yeah.
But when you hit APMF, the physics of the entire company reverse. The market starts ripping the product out of your hands.
The gravity shifts.
Exactly. You suddenly can't keep the servers from crashing. Money is piling up faster than you can hire accountants to count it. Customers are complaining that your customer service is too slow because they are so desperate to use the tool.
It's a completely different problem set.
You aren't pushing a boulder up a hill anymore. You are being pulled forward by the massive gravitational force of the market's need.
And the Andreessen's advice for a company trapped in the BPMF phase, when you are still dragging that dead animal, is essentially a ruthless survival mandate.
Do whatever it takes.
Yeah. He says rewrite the product from scratch. Change the target market entirely. Fire people who don't fit the new direction. Hire different people who do. Before PMF, your startup isn't even a real company.
It's just a hypothesis.
Right. It's a highly stressful hypothesis that is currently burning cash. Nobody cares about your company culture or your catered lunches or your logo design until the market pulls.
But this is where the manual's update for 2026 becomes absolutely critical to understand. In 2014, when these ideas were really being codified into the culture, the bottleneck was still the product. Building a good product was hard.
Yeah, you needed real engineers.
But today, as we established, a solo founder can use a swarm of AI agents to write, test, and deploy code in a matter of days.
So the product is abundant. Product excellence is no longer the differentiator. It is just the bare minimum entry ticket to step into the arena.
And because product creation is practically free and instant, finding TMF in 2026 requires a new discipline the manual calls channel mastery. The market might be out there. Your product might perfectly satisfy their need. But because the internet is a hyper-crowded bazaar where every single stall is screaming through an AI-powered megaphone, the market might literally never see you.
I have to push back on Andreessen's determinism here, because if you're a founder listening to this, you might feel a bit paralyzed.
I can see that.
I mean, Andreessen makes it sound like the market is this pre-existing gravitational field in space. If it's there, you fall into it. If it's not, you die. But wait, if the market does all the heavy lifting, doesn't that strip the founder of their agency?
That is the existential question.
What if you're building something truly unprecedented? When Steve Jobs built the iPhone or when Elon Musk built Tesla, the market for a touchscreen supercomputer without a keyboard or a luxury electric car, it didn't exist to pull them in. People didn't even know they wanted those things. Can a market be sculpted by a visionary rather than just discovered by a prospector?
That is the most persistent, valid critique of Andreessen's worldview, and the source material explicitly acknowledges it. Some of the greatest, most valuable companies in human history didn't just passively enter markets. They manufactured them through sheer force of will, brilliant narrative, and unparalleled experience design.
They willed it into existence.
They sculpted demand out of nothing. However, Andreessen's counter-argument is that those are the absolute rarest exceptions in business history. Betting on your personal ability to warp reality and dictate human desires like Steve Jobs is a very dangerous, highly arrogant strategy, especially for a first-time founder.
You probably aren't Steve Jobs.
Statistically speaking, no. And there is an even darker side to this in 2026, which the text calls out as a specific modern trap. Because of the proliferation of AI, founders are increasingly hallucinating PMF.
Hallucinating PMF. Yes,
Yeah.
the hallucinated momentum. This is a massive blind spot today. Let's walk through how this happens. AI allows a founder to generate incredibly convincing fake momentum.
It looks so real on a dashboard.
Right. You can use an LLM to scrape the internet, personalize thousands of cold outreach emails, and automate the sending. You get a 5% response rate, which gets you meetings. You hear a feature request in a meeting, and you use an AI coding assistant to build that feature overnight.
The cycle is incredibly fast.
You show it to the prospect, they're impressed by your speed, and they sign up for a free trial.
On the founder's dashboard, that looks exactly like the pull. The graph is going up and to the right.
But it's a mirage, because a week later, that user churns. They never log in again. You could buy cheap algorithmic attention that looks like growth, but it completely lacks actual utility and long-term retention.
It's vanity metrics on steroids.
You hallucinate the fit, because AI has made the illusion of success, the emails, the features, the signups, so cheap to manufacture.
Yeah.
But you haven't actually solved a deep pain point.
You're just generating noise.
So Andreessen gives us the market as gravity. You have to find the pull, but you have to be terrified of hallucinating it. But as we just discussed, sometimes the market is sleepy. Sometimes you can't just sit there in a vacuum waiting for gravity to take over. You have to manufacture that momentum yourself.
You have to spark it.
You have to spark the engine. And that brings us to the philosophy of Paul Graham.
If Marc Andreessen views startups from the boardroom, looking down at the macroeconomics of the ocean, analyzing the tectonic plates, Paul Graham views startups from the absolute trenches.
He's right there in the mud.
He is looking at the micro-tactics of physically rowing the boat.
He is the patron saint of the startup garage.
He truly is. And his entire philosophy, decades of investing and advising thousands of companies, is compressed into the foundational motto of Y Combinator: make something people want.
It is so deceptively simple. Make something people want. It sounds like a bumper sticker.
It does.
But the text points out that Graham's first radical move with this motto is detaching the startup from a revenue obsession in the very early days. He argues that money is downstream of love.
Downstream of love, exactly.
If people desperately, intensely want what you make, you will eventually figure out the monetization mechanics. But if they don't love it, no pricing strategy, no brilliant business model in the world will save you from failing.
And to get to that level of intense love, Graham introduces what might be the most counterintuitive yet ruthlessly effective piece of startup advice ever formalized. Do things that don't scale.
Do things that don't scale. Startups don't magically go viral. Founders physically force them to take off.
The modern myth is the electric starter. You push a button, you launch your app on Product Hunt or X, the algorithm picks it up, and boom, you have viral, effortless growth.
Everyone wants that overnight success.
Graham says no, that's a lie. Early startups are like the manual cranks on early 20th century automobile engines. You have to get out of the car, grab the crank, and sweat. You have to physically exert yourself to get the engine to catch. And the most famous example he uses to illustrate this is the early days of Airbnb.
This story is legendary, but let's really look at why it worked. They were flatlining, they weren't growing, they were burning cash, they were dying.
Things looked bleak.
And what did they do? They didn't run a massive Facebook ad campaign. They didn't sit in their office optimizing their SEO keywords. They physically flew to New York City.
Yep.
They walked door to door to the apartments of their early hosts. They took professional photos of the living rooms with an actual camera, and they sat down at the kitchen table to manually help these people rewrite their listings.
It is the ultimate unscalable activity. You cannot fly to a million homes.
No, of course not.
But it worked because it solved the immediate paralyzing barrier of trust and quality. And Graham extrapolates a standard from this for what user delight should actually feel like. He says your goal as a founder isn't to get 1,000 people to kind of like your product.
Right.
Your goal is to get 100 users who feel like finding your product was the greatest discovery they've made all year.
Intense devotion from a hyper-specific niche rather than mild approval from a massive market.
Large corporations are terrified of niches. They have to appeal to the mass market, so they build safe, bland products. Startups must do the exact opposite. They have to over-index on a tiny, almost weird subset of people, build exactly what they need, and worship them.
And Graham also puts a hard metric on this to keep founders honest. He says startup equals growth. And the target you should be aiming for is 10% weekly growth.
10% weekly growth. That is a staggering number. If you compound 10% weekly growth, the math becomes astronomical very quickly.
It does. It's insane. But his point is, if you are sitting at 1% weekly growth, you haven't figured it out yet. You do not have product market fit. Stop pretending you do. And he ties this directly to a startup survival in his famous essay, Startups in 13 Sentences.
He fundamentally redefines what the term burn rate means. It's not just a financial metric on a spreadsheet. It is a biological clock.
A biological clock.
That is such a vital, liberating reframing for a founder. If you have $100,000 in your bank account and you are burning $10,000 a month on servers and rent, you don't just have 10 months of money.
Well, yeah.
You have 10 months of time to iterate. Money equals time, and time equals your ability to try different versions of the product until you finally find the one people actually want.
So every dollar saved is another day alive.
Therefore, if you eat ramen and work out of your garage, you physically get more iterations. You buy yourself more swings at the bat.
Okay, I want to pause here and really sit in an insight that the 2026 manual brings up, because it blew my mind. Graham compares this early hustle to a manual crank. You sweat to ignite the engine. But if I'm listening to this right now in 2026, I'm thinking, wait, I can launch an AI app to 1 million people with one click.
It's easier than ever.
I can prompt an agent to do 1 million highly personalized, context-aware outreach emails in 3 seconds. Doesn't doing things that don't scale sound incredibly inefficient and archaic? Why would I go door-to-door in New York when I have an AI sales army?
It's the obvious question.
But the text suggests that this automation is exactly why the manual crank is more powerful than ever.
You've hit on the exact beautiful paradox of 2026. Because digital outreach, coding, and basic product creation are perfectly automated, they have been entirely commoditized.
Yeah, they have zero value now.
1 million perfectly written AI emails are just noise. They go straight into the psychological spam filter of the modern human mind. We tune it out instantly.
We don't even read them anymore.
The only signal left in a noisy world is friction. The only signal left is human effort. So, doing things that don't scale is no longer just a tactic to acquire your first users. It has become the ultimate cryptographic proof that you actually care.
Let's just pause on that. Cryptographic proof of caring. That is brilliant.
Think about the psychology of the consumer. If I receive a flawless, customized email pitching me a product, I assume an AI wrote it. I feel nothing.
Same. Delete.
But if a founder navigates the subway, walks into my office lobby, shakes my hand, and hands me a clunky physical prototype to test while they watch my screen, I know that's real.
You can't fake that.
An AI cannot fly to New York. An AI cannot sit in your living room and listen to you complain about why a software interface is frustrating. Only a human being with skin in the game will do that. In an era of infinite synthetic media and frictionless spam, visceral human friction is the only way trust is established.
And let's extrapolate how this applies beyond just consumer apps like Airbnb. Think about heavy B2B or defense tech in 2026. Doing things that don't scale isn't going door to door to apartments in Manhattan.
No, it's much higher stakes.
It's navigating a brutal, highly politicized 2-year procurement cycle with the Department of Defense. It's doing intense, highly secure, localized pilots in a hospital basement. It's manually building trust face-to-face with a 4-star general or a skeptical hospital administrator. You absolutely cannot automate that with a language model.
You cannot. And this highlights a brilliant synthesis that the source text makes between Andreessen and Graham. Andreessen's model can sometimes imply that marketing and distribution are secondary, because if the market is great, it just violently pulls the product.
Right.
But Graham embeds distribution directly into the act of product discovery. When you go out and manually recruit users face-to-face, you aren't just marketing to them. You are learning what the product actually needs to be. The feedback loop is instant. Distribution and product development aren't separate departments. They become the exact same engine.
So Andreessen gives us the macro environment, the massive gravity, the market. Graham gives us the micro hustle, the manual crank required to win those first devoted users. But here is the missing, deeply human piece of the puzzle. Hustling like that is exhausting.
It will destroy you if you're not careful.
Dragging a dead animal through the sand while tweaking your code at 3 a.m. will break a person. What keeps the founder from just collapsing in the dark while cranking that engine? Why do they keep going? To answer that, we have to look inward. We have to look at the psychology and the spirit of the builder. And that brings us to the philosophy of Naval Ravikant.
If Andreessen is the ocean and Graham is the act of rowing, Naval is the internal compass inside the sailor's head. Naval takes the entire concept of product market fit and shifts the hierarchy completely.
How so?
Andreessen says market is supreme. Naval says, actually, no, it is founder product market fit. The founder is the foundational variable.
And Naval has this incredibly provocative, clarifying rule. He says, if you build for yourself, you'll always have product market fit.
Which is a total rejection of the traditional MBA approach to abstract market research. Naval argues that the most reliable, highest fidelity first customer in the world is you.
Because you can't lie to yourself.
If you are solving a deep, agonizing, specific pain that you personally experience every day, you don't need to run focus groups. You don't need to hire consultants to tell you what the market wants. You already know exactly what the product needs to feel like. You possess what he calls passion market fit.
Passion market fit as the absolute prerequisite for survival. There's a quote from the text summarizing his view that I love. It says, a product is a theory, marketing is an explanation, but a founder is a uniquely qualified translator.
It elevates the founder from being just an interchangeable manager or a generic CEO to being a rare, irreplaceable ingredient in the recipe. Naval's entire philosophy orbits around a concept he calls specific knowledge.
Let's define that for the listeners. What is specific knowledge?
He argues that immense wealth is created through a combination of specific knowledge, rapid iteration, and leverage. Specific knowledge is the stuff you cannot go to school and be trained for. It comes from your uniquely lived experience, your bizarre combinations of skills, and your weird, deep obsessions.
It's the thing that feels entirely like play to you, but looks like exhausting work to everyone else.
Precisely. And because you possess this specific knowledge, and because it feels like play, you have the infinite endurance to keep going when the market ignores you for the first 2 years.
You don't burn out.
Naval says the ultimate predictor of PMF isn't the total addressable market size on a pitch deck. It's a high shipping cadence.
Speed of learning.
Yes. Startups do not win because they magically have the right answer on day one. They win because they mutate and adapt faster than their environment. Yeah. And you can only maintain a punishing high shipping cadence if you are genuinely obsessed with the problem.
Yeah, if you're just a mercenary, you'll quit.
If you are just chasing a crypto trend or an AI trend because you want to get rich, you will burn out and quit after the third failed pivot because it doesn't feel like play. It just feels like pain.
Now, Naval has this one highly controversial take that goes viral constantly, and I have to stop you and push back on it because it sounds almost arrogant. He says, if you need salespeople, your product probably sucks.
Which, if taken completely literally, is an absurd statement, especially in the complex B2B reality of 2026.
Right. If you are a startup trying to sell proprietary satellite imagery data to massive agricultural conglomerates, you absolutely need sales. You can't just put a buy now button on a website and expect a Fortune 500 company to click it.
Of course not.
If I'm a founder in 2026 and I refuse to hire sales because I'm waiting for organic pull, aren't I just going to get crushed by a competitor who has a worse product but unleashes a massive AI sales bot army to dominate the channel?
The text does an excellent job of clarifying this exact tension. Naval isn't literally saying never hire a sales team. He's making a much deeper philosophical point about not using persuasion as a crutch.
Okay, that makes sense.
If you have to rely on an incredibly charismatic salesperson or a relentless AI outbound campaign to trick or heavily pressure someone into buying your software, it means the software lacks organic pull. The value isn't obvious.
You're forcing it.
Naval is attacking the delusion that a fundamentally weak, undifferentiated product can be saved by aggressive, world-class marketing. The value of the product should be self-evident to the specific user who needs it.
That makes sense. But there's another danger to Naval's philosophy in the modern era. Naval tells you that speed of learning is your oxygen. Iterate, iterate, iterate. But for you listening, if you're a founder right now and you're iterating super fast just because AI allows you to ship a new feature every 3 hours, aren't you just running in circles?
You easily could be.
How do you distinguish between a high shipping cadence that is actually zeroing in on the truth of the market and just throwing AI-generated spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks?
That is the core vulnerability of Naval's philosophy today. When the cost of iteration drops to zero, action can very easily become a substitute for strategy. You feel productive because you are shipping code, but you aren't actually moving forward.
It's motion versus progress.
The distinction lies in what you are learning from the spaghetti. Are you shipping fast to test a rigid core hypothesis about human behavior? Or are you just shipping fast because your AI assistant makes it easy to add a new button?
And this ties back perfectly to specific knowledge. In a 2026 world that is absolutely flooded with AI-built apps, generic founders are dead on arrival.
Completely doomed. Think about it. If anyone can prompt an AI to build a fully functional CRM or a scheduling app in a day, then the code itself has zero intrinsic value. The execution of the software has been fully commoditized.
So what is left?
What is the actual defensive moat of the company? It's founder taste. It's the founder's obsession. It's the credibility, the unique worldview, and the specific community the founder brings to the table.
It's the human element.
Naval saw this coming years ago. He realized that the human being at the center of the machine is the ultimate differentiator when the machine itself is democratized.
Okay, let's take a breath and synthesize where we are, because we've just built the ultimate historically tested startup survival guide. We have Naval's internal compass, the obsession and specific knowledge that keeps you going. We have Graham's trenches, the manual hustle, the unscalable friction required to win and delight those first users. And we have Andreessen's macro reality, the brutal gravity of the market that eventually has to pull you into the power law.
It is a complete, elegant doctrine. Start with Naval's obsession, ignite the engine with Graham's hustle, and scale into Andreessen's market gravity.
But, and this is the massive, chilling pivot in our 2026 field manual, the source material warns us that even if you execute all three of those philosophies perfectly, today, it is no longer enough to build a generational, ecosystem-defining company.
It is necessary, but it is no longer sufficient.
We have to introduce the new paradigm. We have to talk about the twin-engine plane and the era of the Solara. Let's start with the plane metaphor, because this fundamentally rewired how we think about building things at scale.
The manual asks us to think of the classic, successful tech startup from the 2010s as a single-engine plane. That one engine is product market fit. For the last 20 years, the prevailing belief in Silicon Valley was that if that single engine works, the plane flies.
Right.
If you build something incredibly useful, the pure utility of the product creates its own gravity. It goes viral organically.
And in the early internet era, that was undeniably true. I mean, if you build Google search in 1998 or if you launched Facebook in 2004, the internet was so starved for actual utility that PMF essentially created its own marketing. Word of mouth was frictionless.
But in the AI era of 2026, the text argues that a single-engine plane is going to stall and crash into the ocean. Why? Because the atmosphere itself has changed. The gravity is heavier. Human attention is completely saturated.
There's just too much out there.
As we established, building software is practically free. When the product is abundant, PMF alone, just having a good product that people like, cannot generate enough thrust to break through the deafening noise of the market.
So you need engine number two.
You need a twin-engine plane. And that second engine is defined in the text as marketing escape velocity.
Marketing escape velocity. I want to be really clear for the listener here, because when people hear marketing, they think of advertising. This does not mean running better Facebook ads or having a higher SEO budget or having a clever TikTok dance go viral.
Not at all. The manual defines marketing escape velocity as the ability to architect a self-sustaining growth loop where distribution actively compounds over time. It means building a mechanism to overcome the new, heavy gravity of the market, which includes those algorithmic choke points, the deeply entrenched incumbents, and the massive platform monopolies.
Give me a concrete example of what that actually looks like in practice. How do you bypass an algorithmic choke point?
Let's imagine a startup in 2026 tackling energy abundance. They aren't just selling solar panels, that's a single engine. To achieve marketing escape velocity, they might tokenize the local energy grid.
Well, wow.
They build a system where users who install their panels can seamlessly sell excess energy to their neighbors automatically. By doing that, they create a localized network effect.
So every new neighbor adds value to everyone else.
Every single new neighbor that joins makes the energy cheaper and the network more robust for everyone else. They aren't relying on Google search ads to acquire users. The financial incentive of the network itself acquires the users. The momentum fuels itself.
And if you don't have that second engine, if you just have a great product but no compounding distribution loop, you remain permanently trapped in what the text calls the lower atmosphere of obscurity. You might have a great product, you might even have a small, highly loyal user base, and you might make a good living. But you never cross the threshold into global dominance.
And this realization leads directly to the death of the unicorn.
This blew my mind. For a decade, a billion-dollar valuation, the mythological unicorn, was the absolute gold standard of Silicon Valley. It was the beast every single VC was hunting.
But the manual declares the unicorn era functionally over. Inflation, the pools of global capital, and the sheer terrifying scale of massive AI platforms have fundamentally redefined what big actually means. A billion-dollar company is now just a skyscraper.
A skyscraper.
It's impressive to look at, it generates revenue, but ultimately it's just a single building sitting in a larger city. The new target for elite venture capital is the Solara.
$1 trillion valuation.
Yes. A Solara isn't a skyscraper. It's a gravitational body. It's a sun. It generates its own economic solar system. It possesses so much mass that it pulls suppliers, third-party developers, competitors, and entire global labor markets into its orbit.
The historical examples it uses are staggering. Think about Amazon. Amazon didn't just win the online bookselling market. It reinvented global logistics, retail, and then built AWS, which became the cloud infrastructure for the entire internet.
They changed the underlying infrastructure.
Or Google. Google didn't just win the search engine war. It became the literal nervous system of human information. They didn't just enter a market. They swallowed adjacent industries whole.
And building a Solara requires a fundamentally different psychological and operational approach than building a unicorn. The text draws a sharp contrast between two models of execution, the Columbus model versus the NASA model.
I want to talk directly to you listening about this, because this concept challenges absolutely everything we've been taught about the scrappy, lean startup. The old Silicon Valley ethos was the Columbus model. Build a minimum viable product, set sail into the fog of the market, iterate as fast as you can, and just hope you discover a continent by accident. Pivot until you hit land.
Which works perfectly if you are building a B2B SaaS tool for HR departments.
But the text argues that you cannot use the Columbus model to build a moonshot. You don't A/D test a rocket engine while it's in the air.
No, you definitely don't.
The NASA model, the Solara model, requires a grand vision from day one. You have to architect the massive system before the evidence of its success is fully visible. If imagination and convergence rather than basic engineering are the new bottlenecks in 2026, doesn't that mean the era of the scrappy specialist founder is completely over and the era of the grand synthesizer has begun?
That is the ultimate defining conclusion of the 2026 landscape. We are dealing with massive, colliding technological waves. Think about what is happening simultaneously right now. Artificial intelligence, advanced robotics, quantum computing, synthetic biology, advanced energy generation. They are all hitting maturity at the exact same time.
It's almost too much to comprehend. Nobody on Earth can be a deep, PhD-level expert in all of those fields.
Exactly. So the Solara founder cannot be a specialist mechanic tinkering with one piece of code. They must be an architect of convergence.
An architect of convergence.
They have to possess the imagination to see how a breakthrough in quantum compute allows for a radically new protein folding model, which gets physically executed by a swarm of automated robotic labs, which is funded and governed by a decentralized tokenized structure. The founder is the glue between the disciplines.
And because of this, the VC filter has violently shifted. The manual says elite VCs are actively ignoring clever sauce apps and thin AI wrappers. They're exclusively hunting for founders tackling planetary-scale problems.
Climate resilience, energy abundance, orbital space infrastructure, AI governance and safety. Trillion-dollar companies do not emerge from building a slightly more convenient calendar app. They emerge from civilization-scale necessity. If you want to build a Solara, you have to architect a system that human civilization literally requires to function better.
It is incredibly intimidating, but honestly, it's also deeply inspiring. We've covered massive, complex ground today in this deep dive. We started with Andreessen's market gravity, proving that you have to respect the mathematical reality of the power law, where the market ultimately decides if you live or die.
It is the brutal truth of the arena.
Then we moved through Paul Graham's manual crank, learning that before you can scale, you have to be willing to sweat in trenches, do the unscalable work, and earn the intense devotion of a tiny niche.
We examined Naval's internal compass, revealing that specific knowledge and founder obsession are the only remaining defensive moats when AI commoditizes the actual execution of the work.
And we brought it all together in the staggering 2026 reality, the twin-engine Solara plane. Product market fit is just engine 1. You need marketing escape velocities in engine 2 to break through the algorithmic noise. And you need the grand NASA vision to aim at planetary scale problems. Building the product has become the easy part. Engineering the distribution, the narrative, and the convergence of multiple deep technologies is the true test of the modern founder.
It is a completely redrawn map. The fundamental coastlines of human psychology, what people desire, how they trust, remain exactly the same as they were 100 years ago. But the terrain of execution, the tools we use to navigate, is entirely unrecognizable.
Which brings us right back to that 1500s map and those massive blank spaces where the sea monsters used to be. We spent a lot of time today talking about how AI has commoditized basic competence. Your ability to write a flawless Python script or draft a perfect marketing email or spin up a database is no longer special. The machine can do it.
We are past that point.
But that reality also means your unique taste, your specific weird lived experience, your obsessions, and your sheer imagination are the only things left in this universe that are truly scarce. So I want to leave you with a thought to mull over. Take a hard look at the deep friction in your own life. What is the planetary scale problem that only you are obsessed enough to solve? Because in the era of the Solara, it's no longer enough to just build a cool piece of the future in your garage. You have to figure out how to build the gravitational pull that forces the rest of the world to step into it. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the consensus.